Welcome, fellow historians, to Quiet Historians' Worlds. Can you hear it? The murmur of 10,000 voices, the bleating of sheep in crowded alleyways, the scrape of a stylus on wet clay. This is the sound of a world being born. Today we are not just visiting a place, we are stepping into an idea, the very first time humanity decided to live together in a city. Our journey takes us to ancient Sumer, to the sun-baked walls of Ur. This is the birthplace of writing, of taxes, of organized religion, and of the bureaucracy that still shapes our lives today. We will follow the lives of 4 people whose individual heartbeats formed the pulse of this great city. As we explore their world, I have a question for you. What modern job do you think would have been the most respected or powerful in a city like Ur? A scientist, a politician, an engineer, a priest? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy these journeys into our shared past, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more quiet stories from our human history. Your support makes these explorations possible. Now tell us, what kind of story should we explore next? For now, take a deep breath of the dusty sun-warmed air. The gates of Ur are opening. The sun was not yet a god, but a promise. It was a faint, pearlescent glow on the eastern horizon, a soft blush against the deep indigo of the Mesopotamian night. Across the flat, fertile plains that lay between the 2 great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, the air was cool and still, holding the last vestiges of nocturnal peace. In a small mud-brick farmhouse, a day's journey from the looming silhouette of the great city of Ur, a man named Dagon awoke. He did not wake to a sound, but to a familiar ache in his lower back, the chronic complaint of a life spent bending over the rich, dark soil. He was a farmer, a man whose existence was dictated by 2 forces, the rhythm of the seasons and the demands of the city. He sat up on his reed mat, the rough fibers scratching his bare skin. Beside him, his wife and 2 small children still slept, their breaths soft and even. For a moment he watched them, a fierce, protective love swelling in his chest. Everything he did, every callus on his hands was for them. Today was a momentous day. It was the day of the barley tax. The culmination of a full season of back-breaking labor was now loaded onto his small solid-wheeled cart, which stood waiting in the pre-dawn gloom beside his humble home. The cart was pulled by a single placid ox, whose warm grassy breath misted in the cool air. The barley, a river of pale gold, was the finest of his crop, reserved for the city's god, Nana, the moon god, whose temple crowned the city like a second man-made mountain. This offering was not a choice, it was the law of God and man, the price of living on land that belonged ultimately to the temple. Dagon performed his morning ritual with quiet reverence. He washed his face and hands in a clay basin of cool water drawn from the nearby irrigation canal, the lifeblood of his farm. He murmured a short prayer to the spirits of the field, thanking them for the harvest. Then he ate his meager breakfast, a flat, hard barley cake and a handful of dates. He kissed his sleeping wife on the forehead and gently touched the heads of his children before slipping out into the twilight. The journey to Ur was long. He had to begin now if he was to reach the city gates by mid-morning. With a soft click of his tongue and a gentle tug on the rope, he coaxed his ox into motion. The wooden wheels of the cart groaned in protest, a sound that seemed to complain at the immense weight of a farmer's duty. Miles away within the labyrinthine embrace of the city itself, another day was beginning. In a narrow 2-story house in the scribal quarter, a young boy named Enki was roused by his father. Enki was 10 years old, with the quick, intelligent eyes of a boy who noticed everything. Unlike Dagon's children, who would grow up to work the land, Enki's path was to be one of the mind. He was a student at the Aduba, the scribal school, a place of immense prestige and brutal discipline. His morning meal was a small bowl of porridge and a piece of bread, eaten in silence. His father, a minor administrator in the temple bureaucracy, watched him with a stern but hopeful expression. Enki was the family's future. A successful scribe could attain wealth, power, and a life free from manual labor. The key to this future was a small wedge-shaped piece of reed, the stylus, and the mastery of the hundreds of complex signs that made up the cuneiform script. Enki gathered his things, his stylus, a small bag of practice clay, and the heavy clay tablet containing his previous day's disastrous attempts at copying a proverb. His master, a notoriously harsh man, had beaten his hands for his mistakes. The memory made Enki's stomach clench with fear. He bowed to his father and stepped out into the narrow, unpaved street. The air was already beginning to thicken with the smells of the awakening city, the smoke of countless small cooking fires, the sharp tang of animal dung, and the ever-present dusty scent of sun-baked mud brick. In the bustling commercial district near the city's main canal, a merchant named Ilshu was already at work. His house was larger than Enki's, built around a central courtyard, a sign of his considerable wealth. Ilshu was a man in his prime, his face hardened by the sun of distant lands and his eyes narrowed by years of shrewd calculation. He was an Alug Tamkaram, a long-distance trader, one of the vital arteries of the city's lifeblood. He stood in his storeroom, the air cool and smelling of cedarwood and exotic spices. By the light of a small sesame oil lamp, he inspected his latest acquisitions. There were magnificent cedar logs from the mountains of Lebanon, ready to be sold to the temple for the construction of a new shrine. There were bags of pungent spices from the east, and gleaming, dark blue lapis lazuli, from the distant mines of Badakhshan. His most prized possessions, however, were several rolls of finely woven cloth from the Indus Valley, a land the Sumerians called Meluha. He ran his hand over the soft, smooth fabric. These goods had traveled for months by boat and by donkey caravan, across deserts and seas. Each item represented a gamble, a risk, a story of immense effort. Today, in the great bazaar of he would turn those stories into profit, and hide above them all, in the sacred precinct at the city's heart, a man named Zimri was preparing to meet his god. Zimri was a high priest of the moon god Nemrut, an old man whose entire life had been spent within the temple walls. His body was frail, but his spirit was infused with the immense ancient power of his office. He stood in a purification chamber at the base of the great ziggurat, the colossal, three-tiered temple that dominated the city. Servants washed his body with sanctified water and dressed him in spotless white linen robes. His face was a mask of serene, focused piety. He was divorced from the mundane concerns of the men below. He did not worry about harvests or profits or the sting of a schoolmaster's cane. His concern was the cosmos. He was the intermediary between the city of mortals and the heavens. His duty today was to ascend the great staircase of the ziggurat to the small shrine at its summit, the bedchamber of the god, to perform the morning rituals, to read the omens in the sky, and to ensure that the divine order that kept the world from collapsing into chaos was maintained. As the first, brilliant rays of the sun finally crested the horizon and struck the highest point of the ziggurat, turning its bricks to gold, the four men were all in motion. The farmer, the scribe, the merchant, and the priest, four separate lives, four different worlds, all drawn inexorably towards the center, towards the magnificent beating heart of the city of Ur. The sun had now climbed higher, burning away the morning coolness, and beginning to bake the vast, flat plain. For Dagon the farmer, the city of Urdo was no longer a distant silhouette, but a colossal looming reality. Its walls, built of millions of sun-dried mud bricks, rose from the earth like a natural cliff face, a testament to the power of 1,000 hands working as one. The walls were so thick that a chariot could have raced along their top. This was the first Great Barrier, the line that separated the tamed, ordered world of the city from the wild, unpredictable world of the countryside. As he approached the main western gate, the stream of human traffic thickened into a river. He joined a long, slow-moving queue of farmers with their carts, shepherds guiding flocks of fat-tailed sheep, and merchants with their donkey caravans. The air, once clean and open, was now thick with dust, the bleating of animals, and the murmur of 100 conversations in a dozen different accents. The sheer concentration of humanity was overwhelming. When his turn finally came, he was stopped by the gate guards, broad-shouldered men in simple leather helmets, armed with bronze-tipped spears. They were the city's first line of defense, and its first layer of bureaucracy. One guard looked him over with a bored, practiced eye, his gaze lingering on the heavy load of barley. "For the temple," he grunted. Dagon nodded, his heart pounding a little faster. He was always nervous in the presence of the city's authority. "The tithe, from the fields of the god." The guard nodded and waved him through. Dagon guided his ox through the massive shadowy gateway, and into the city of The change was instantaneous and visceral. The open sky was gone, replaced by the narrow slice of blue visible between the high, windowless walls of the tightly packed houses. The relative silence of the plains was shattered by an explosion of sound, the shouting of vendors, the crying of children, the hammering of a distant coppersmith, the constant shuffling tramp of 1,000 feet on the dusty ground. The smells were even more intense: roasting meat, baking bread, human sweat, and the pungent odor of the open sewer drains that ran down the center of the alleys. He navigated his cart through the labyrinthine streets, which were barely wide enough for it to pass. People scrambled to get out of his way, shouting at him to move faster. It was a world of sharp elbows and sharper tongues, so different from the slow, deliberate pace of his farm. His destination was the sacred precinct, the heart of the city, but getting there was an ordeal in itself. Meanwhile, young Enki had arrived at the Aduba. It was not a grand building, but a simple mud brick house, identical to the others in the quarter. The only difference was the sound that emanated from it, the constant low murmur of boys reciting their lessons. He entered the main courtyard, which served as the classroom. About 20 other boys, ranging in age from 6 to 16, were already seated on reed mats, their clay tablets on their laps. The master, a stern man named Lugal, stood at the front. He was a man whose own hands were soft, a sign that he had never performed a day of manual labor in his life. But in his hand, he held a long, thin cane, which he used with an expert's precision. The discipline was iron. The Sumerian proverb was clear: he who would excel in the school of the scribe must arise with the dawn. The day's lesson began. Enki took a lump of fresh, wet clay and began to knead it, shaping it into a smooth pillow-like tablet. Today they were practicing the most basic signs. Lugal would call out a word, and the boys would have to press the wedge-shaped tip of their stylus into the clay to form the correct symbol. The asterisk. The asterisk. Lugal called out, the word for water. Enki pressed his stylus into the clay. His hand trembled slightly. The sign for water was simple, just 2 parallel horizontal strokes, but they had to be perfect. The right depth, the right angle, the right length. Lugal moved down the rows, his eyes missing nothing. He stopped before Enki. He looked down at the boy's tablet. and his lip curled in a sneer. "Is this the scratch of a bird, or the mark of a scribe? Your hand is lazy, boy." The cane whistled through the air, and landed with a sharp crack across Enki's knuckles. Pain, hot and sharp, shot up his arm. Tears welled in his eyes, but he did not cry out. To do so would earn him another blow. He simply wiped his hand, smoothed over the clay, and prepared to try again. This was the price of knowledge. In the bazaar, Ilshu the merchant was in his element. He had secured a prime location for his stall, near the main canal where the foreign ships docked. The bazaar was the city's stomach, and its heart, a chaotic, vibrant explosion of commerce. The air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and cumin, the smell of grilling fish, and the stench of the nearby butcher's block. Ilshu had arranged his goods with a showman's flair. The magnificent cedar logs were stacked to one side, their rich scent perfuming the air. The deep blue of the lapis lazuli was displayed on a dark cloth to accentuate its color, but the Meluhan cloth, his prize, was kept partially hidden, to be revealed only to serious buyers. A temple official, a portly man in fine, fringed robes, approached his stall. His eyes immediately fell on the cedar logs. "The temple of Ningal requires timber for the new doors," the official said, his voice dripping with self-importance. "What is your price for these logs?" Ilshu bowed respectfully. "A gift for the goddess, of course, honored sir. Merely the cost of their transport from the great mountains of the north." He named a price, a number that was easily double what the transport had actually cost. The official scoffed. The goddess does not reward greed. I will give you half that." And so the dance began. It was a negotiation of ritualized insults and exaggerated claims, a performance that both men knew and understood. Ilshu would protest his poverty, the dangers of the journey, the immense quality of his goods. The official would complain about the temple's strained finances and the impiety of merchants. It would go on for some time, but eventually, they would arrive at a price, a number somewhere in the middle. This was the language of the bazaar, and Ilshu was its most fluent speaker. High above the chaos, Zimri the priest continued his slow, solitary ascent. He had reached the first great terrace of the ziggurat. The sounds of the city below were already beginning to fade, replaced by the whisper of the wind. He paused here, at the gate of the sun, and performed the first of the morning's rites, a prayer to the sun god Utu, whose brilliant light was now flooding the world. From this vantage point, he could see the entire city laid out below him like a clay map. He saw the winding, narrow streets, the flat-roofed houses packed tightly together, the dark green of the date palm groves in the courtyards of the wealthy. He could see the bustling harbor with its small bobbing ships, and the tiny, ant-like figure of Dagon's cart, now deep within the city's maze. He saw it all as a single living organism, a complex creation of humanity, that he as a priest was charged with protecting. His gaze was serene, his purpose clear. He was climbing towards the heavens, leaving the world of men behind, to plead their case before the gods. The sun reached its zenith, a merciless white-hot eye hanging directly over the city of Ur. The narrow streets offered little shade, and the heat radiating from the mud-brick walls was intense. For most citizens, this was a time to retreat indoors, to eat a midday meal, and rest during the worst of the day's heat. But for Ilshu, the merchant, this was the heart of the day, the peak of commerce in the great bazaar. His stall was now a whirlwind of activity. The earlier, leisurely negotiations had given way to a faster, more frantic pace of trade. Local women haggled over the price of a handful of exotic spices to flavor their family's stew. A craftsman argued passionately about the quality of a piece of diorite he needed for a statue. Ilshu's mind was a flurry of calculations, his tongue switching effortlessly between the local Sumerian dialect and the Akkadian tradespeak he used with foreign merchants. His greatest test of the day came in the form of a sea captain from Dilmun, the island known today as Bahrain. The captain, a man with skin as dark and weathered as old leather, had a ship full of copper ingots, the lifeblood of the city's bronze industry. He wanted to trade his copper not for silver, the standard currency, but directly for Ilshu's finest Meluhan cloth. The cloth of the Indus is prized by the wives of our kings, the captain said, his voice a low rumble. This copper is the finest in the world, an even trade. Ilshu laughed, a short, sharp bark. An even trade? My friend, you offer me a stone and ask for the moon. This cloth has traveled further than you can imagine, across deserts that would boil the water in your skins. Your copper is common. This cloth is art. He carefully unrolled a small section of the fabric, its intricate patterns and soft texture a testament to a level of craftsmanship that was legendary. The captain's eyes widened slightly. He wanted it. Ilshu knew he had him. The negotiation would be long and fierce, a battle of wits under the blazing sun, but it was a battle Ilshu was born to win. Meanwhile, Dargan the farmer had finally navigated the city's maze and reached the outer walls of the sacred precinct. The noise of the bazaar faded behind him, replaced by a more hushed, reverent atmosphere. This was the city's administrative and religious core, a vast complex of temples, workshops, and storehouses, all dominated by the colossal ziggurat. The air here seemed cleaner, the streets wider and better maintained. He guided his cart towards the temple granaries, a series of long, imposing mud brick buildings with high slit windows for ventilation. The scale of the operation was immense. This was the central bank, the treasury, and the food reserve for the entire city-state. All the surplus wealth of the surrounding lands flowed into this single point. In the scribal school, the midday heat had turned the courtyard into an oven. The wet clay of the tablets dried almost as soon as it was shaped. The boys were drowsy and uncomfortable, their tunics sticking to their backs with sweat, but Lugal, the master, showed no mercy. The afternoon was for mathematics and record-keeping, the true work of a scribe. A farmer brings his barley, Lugal droned, his voice sharp and cutting through the boys' lethargy. He brings 120 measures. The temple's share is 1/3, the palace's share is 1/6, the overseer's share is 1/20th. How much is left for the farmer? Enki's mind swam with the fractions. This was not the simple counting of his childhood. This was the complex arithmetic of the state. He frantically began to press wedges into his clay, his brow furrowed in concentration. He knew that a mistake here would not just earn him a beating. In the real world, a scribe's miscalculation could lead to a dispute, a lawsuit, or even a riot. The weight on his small shoulders felt immense. He was learning the mathematics of power. High above them all, the priest Zimri had reached the second tier of the ziggurat. The world of the city was now far below, a distant humming hive. Here the wind was a constant, cool presence. He stood on the wide, sun-drenched terrace, a place reserved for the priests. From this height, he could see beyond the city walls to the checkerboard of green fields and glittering canals that was Dargan's world. He could see the great curve of the Euphrates River in the distance, and the faint, dusty trails that led to other cities, other kingdoms. His perspective was that of a god. He saw the whole system, the farmers who fed the city, the merchants who brought it wealth, the scribes who kept its records, and he saw himself, and his fellow priests at the very top. the sacred duty of their lives to interpret the will of the gods who governed it all. He turned his face to the sun, feeling its immense life-giving power. He was closer to the heavens now. His final ascent to the Holy of Holies at the very summit was yet to come. The city baked and bustled below, but here, on the sacred mountain, all was quiet, all was order. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting long, sharp shadows across the city, the four threads of our story finally converged at the sacred heart of the temple precinct of the moon god Nana. This was the axis mundi, the center of their world, the point where the heavens, the earth, and the underworld were believed to meet. Dagon the farmer, his long journey finally at an end, stood before the temple granary. An overseer, a priest of a lower order, approached him with a clay tablet and stylus. "The tithe of Dagon, son of Namu," the priest said, his voice flat and official. Two temple workers, their bodies lean and muscular from a life of heavy lifting, began to scoop the barley from Dagon's cart into large standardized measures. They worked with a rhythmic efficiency, their movements a well-practiced routine. Dagon watched every measure being filled. This was the moment of truth. A full season of his labor, of his sweat and worry, was being counted and recorded. The overseer made a series of quick, precise marks on his tablet. 117 measures, he declared. The god is pleased. He handed Dagon a small clay token, a receipt that proved he had paid his due. For Dagon, this small, insignificant-looking piece of baked clay was his protection, his proof of loyalty to the system that both sustained and controlled him. His duty was done. The immense weight on his shoulders, both literal and metaphorical, was finally lifted. At that same moment, a small procession of boys from the Aduba entered the temple precinct. They were led by their master Lugal. They had come to deliver the best of the day's practice tablets as an offering. Enki was among them, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and terror. His mathematical tablet, the one he had struggled so mightily with, had been judged perfect by Lugal, a rare and coveted praise. He walked through the vast, awe-inspiring courtyard, his eyes wide. He had seen the ziggurat from a distance his entire life, but to be here in its shadow was something else entirely. The sheer scale of the architecture was designed to make a man feel small, insignificant before the power of the gods and their earthly representatives. He saw priests in their white robes, temple artisans carving intricate reliefs, and guards standing like statues. This was the world his father wanted for him, a world of order, power, and sacred knowledge. He placed his small tablet on a large offering table at the base of the great staircase, a humble contribution to the immense bureaucracy of the gods. Ilshu the merchant also made his way to the temple. His hard bargaining with the sea captain had been successful. He had acquired a new shipment of copper and sold his prized cloth for a handsome profit. Now it was time to give thanks. It was both a pious duty and a shrewd business move. A generous and public donation to the temple was a way to display wealth, curry favor with the powerful priesthood, and ensure the gods looked kindly upon his future ventures. He did not bring barley or clay tablets. He brought a single magnificent cone-shaped loaf of sugar, an incredibly rare and luxurious commodity that had come all the way from the Indus Valley. He presented his offering to a temple official, who accepted it with a solemn nod. Ilshu knew that his gift would be noted, his name recorded in the temple's ledgers. In the economy of divine favor was a commodity that could be bought and sold like any other. High above them all, Zimri the priest was making his final preparations. He had reached the third and highest terrace of the ziggurat, a sacred space forbidden to all but the highest ranks of the priesthood. The air here was thin and clean. The sounds of the city were gone, replaced by an profound elemental silence. Before him stood the final short staircase that led to the shrine at the very summit, the Giganu, the earthly bedchamber of the god Nana. He stood before the brilliant blue-glazed brick of the shrine's entrance, his heart calm, his mind clear. He had spent his entire life preparing for moments like this. He was no longer Zimri, the man, he was a vessel, a conduit through which the sacred rituals would flow. Inside the shrine, he knew, was the ceremonial bed, the offering table, and the cult statue of the god himself, a figure of lapis lazuli and gold. His task was to prepare the chamber for the god's nightly descent from the heavens. The four men, though they had not spoken a word to one another, were now bound together in this single sacred space. Dagon's barley would become the sacred bread offered to the god. Enki's training would one day allow him to record the temple's vast wealth. Ilshu's exotic goods would adorn the god's shrine, and Zimri would be the one to offer it all, to complete the cycle of tribute and worship that held their entire civilization together. The sun cast their long shadows across the courtyard, four small figures playing their vital parts in the great unfolding drama of the world's first city. As the sun touched the western horizon, the sky exploded into a symphony of fiery orange, deep purple and burnished gold. The oppressive heat of the day finally broke, and a cool breeze began to whisper through the city's narrow streets. For the citizens of this was a time of transition, a turning from the public world of work to the private world of the home. High atop the ziggurat, in the blue-glazed shrine, Zimri the priest began the most sacred ritual of the day. The city below was now shrouded in twilight, its individual sounds melting into a low, indistinct hum. Up here he was alone with his god. He lit the ceremonial oil lamps, their warm, flickering light pushing back the encroaching darkness. He burned a fragrant mixture of cedar and juniper incense, the sweet-smelling smoke curling towards the ceiling, a pleasing aroma to welcome the divine. He approached the cult statue of Nana, a magnificent figure crafted from imported lapis lazuli and gold, its eyes made of inlaid shell. With great reverence he performed the ritual of the evening meal. He placed offerings of the finest bread, made from Dagon's barley, dates and a cup of beer before the statue. This was not a symbolic act. To Zimri the god was truly present, consuming the spiritual essence of the food. He chanted the ancient prayers, his voice a low melodic drone, the words telling of Nana's journey across the night sky in his celestial boat. This was the pinnacle of his existence, the moment where the order of the entire cosmos was affirmed through his actions. Below, the world of the mundane was reasserting itself. Ilshu the merchant, his day's trading complete, directed his servants as they packed his remaining goods and secured his stall for the night. The bazaar was emptying, its daytime chaos giving way to a quieter, more relaxed atmosphere. He had done well. The trade for the copper had been particularly profitable. He made a mental note to send a small gift to the harbor master to ensure his next shipment was unloaded quickly. In Urdor, divine favor was important, but human favor was essential. He walked home through the darkening streets, his stride confident. He was a respected man, his wealth a clear sign of his skill and the god's approval. He looked forward to a good meal, a cup of date wine, and the company of his wife. His was a world of tangible, calculated success. Enki the scribe also made his way home. He clutched his perfected tablet, now dried and hard from the sun, like a trophy. The earlier sting of the cane had faded, replaced by a deep, satisfying sense of accomplishment. When he presented the tablet to his father, the older man's stern face broke into a rare, proud smile. "Good," his father said, the single word worth more to Enki than 1,000 praises. That evening, his father did not just drill him on signs. He began to tell him stories of the gods and heroes, tales of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, stories that were now being written down for the first time. Enki listened, captivated. He was beginning to understand that being a scribe was not just about recording taxes and inventories, it was about becoming a guardian of memory, a keeper of the stories that defined his people. The power of the stylus was the power to make a man's words immortal. Dagon the farmer was already well on his way out of the city. His journey home was lighter, his heart unburdened. The city, which had seemed so overwhelming in the morning, now felt different as he departed. He saw not just chaos but a great, interconnected web of purpose. He saw the temple workshops where his wool would be woven, the bakeries where his barley would become bread, the breweries where it would become beer. A simple farmer, was the foundation of it all. It was a humbling and empowering thought. As he cleared the city gates and entered the open plains, the great ziggurat was the last thing to remain visible, a dark man-made mountain against the star-dusted sky. He looked up and saw the moon, a perfect silver crescent, beginning its own journey across the heavens. It was the symbol of his god, Nana, watching over him. He felt a sense of profound peace. The god was in his temple, the tithe was paid, and he was returning to his family. The world was in its proper order. The divine and the mundane, for a brief perfect moment, were in complete harmony. The moon god Nana, for whom the great ziggurat was built, now reigned supreme in the night sky. The city of Urba, which had pulsed with such frantic energy during the day, settled into a deep and profound quiet. The thick mud brick walls of the houses, which had baked in the sun, now slowly radiated a gentle warmth back into the cool night air, a comforting and protective embrace. The heartbeat of the world had slowed. In his small farmhouse, Dagon was finally home. The lowing of his ox as he unyoked it was a familiar welcome sound. His wife greeted him at the door, her face etched with relief. His children, awakened by his arrival, clung to his legs. He sat with them on the reed mats of his home, the smell of the earthen floor, and the wood smoke from his own hearth, a powerful comfort. He shared his simple meal of barley stew and bread, and as he ate, he told them of the great city, of the towering temple, and of the endless river of people. To his children, who had never traveled more than a mile from their home, it was a story from another world. He held up the small clay token from the temple, a tangible link to that world, before placing it carefully in a niche in the wall. He was tired, a deep, bone-wearying fatigue, but it was the good, satisfying ache of a duty fulfilled. Soon he would sleep, ready to rise before the dawn and return to the soil, the source of his life and his purpose. In the scribal quarter, the light in Enki's house was one of the last to be extinguished. After his father had finished the stories, Enki practiced his signs one last time on a spare piece of clay, his small hand now moving with a new confidence. The fear of the master's cane had been replaced by a nascent love for the craft itself. He was beginning to see the beauty in the precise, elegant shapes, the magic in turning a spoken word into a permanent physical thing. He fell asleep not with dread, but with a quiet excitement for the next day's lessons. He was a small boy on the first step of a long, difficult road, but for the first time, he could see the destination, and it was a place of honor. Ilshu the merchant was not yet asleep. In the privacy of his central courtyard, under the brilliant canopy of the stars, he met with the sea captain from Dilmun. Their business was not yet finished. The official trade was done, but now away from the prying eyes of the temple officials, the real, unofficial trade could begin. Ilshu brought out a small, heavy bag of silver rings. The captain, in turn, produced a small, intricately carved ivory box containing exotic pearls from the southern sea. This was the grey market, the network of personal connections and untaxed exchanges that lubricated the official economy. It was a dangerous game, but the rewards were immense. Ilshu, a master of both the public and the private aspects of commerce, knew that a man's true wealth was built in the shadows, and high above them all Zimri's long day was still not over. His vigil had begun. He stood on the highest point of the man-made world, alone between the sleeping city and the silent wheeling stars. He was watching the heavens, reading the omens in the movements of the planets and the patterns of the constellations. He was searching for signs of the gods' pleasure or their wrath, for portents of flood or famine, of war or prosperity. He was the city's early warning system, its spiritual watchman. The well-being of every soul sleeping below, of Dagon, Enki and Ilshu, rested on his ability to correctly interpret the divine will. He felt no fatigue, only the immense crushing weight of his sacred responsibility. He would keep watch until the first hints of dawn heralded the return of the sun god, and the entire cycle would begin again. The farmer, the scribe, the merchant, the priest, 4 men, 4 lives, 4 separate strands woven into the single, magnificent tapestry of their day was a microcosm of their civilization. It was a civilization built on the surplus of the fields, recorded by the hand of the scribe, expanded by the ambition of the merchant, and sanctified by the rituals of the priest. It was a new and revolutionary way of life, a complex, fragile and powerful machine. And as the city slept under the watchful eye of the moon god, the machine rested, its great heart beating slowly, steadily, ready for the dawn. The first city, the first heartbeat of our own urban world,